entering. But we're really, really happy today. We have a guest speaker. Her name is Taryn Grimes. She is many things, and one of the things she is now is an author of a book called Inappropriate Laughter, a story about loss, grief, and guilt. It's right here. I've read it. I've got all my tabs. It's a really awesome book, and it's about her experience having her mother on hospice care and what it was like partaking in that. And she's going to review a little bit, and we're really, really honored and very grateful that you're here today. So take it away, Taryn.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm very grateful because it was really important to me to share this story because this is our one common denominator. They say it's taxes, but I don't believe that at all. I think it's just dying. I think it's just dying, taking care of our parents, dealing with loss. And my family tends to be, we're very old school Irish. So there's nothing that's off the table in regard to humor. When we're in a difficult situation, we go straight for the funny because it's the only way we can cope. And during this process, I learned so many things about how everybody copes differently. So I shared that in the book as well. Just by way of background, I started out my career when I was 9 as a singer, a professional singer, because my family was very poor, or actually, as my mother would say, broke, because my mother once told my sister, "We're broke, not poor, because poor is of the spirit and broke is of the pocketbook." And so we were broke. And whenever we had a time when, food was very scarce, my father would take me out to a local lounge restaurant. I don't know if some of you remember those, but the piano bars with dinner and a show. And he would convince the manager to let me sing, and then we'd all eat because that's just what we did. And that was the way to get dinner that night. So I'm gonna start reading the book. Something else you should know is by the time I was 25, I had been a Broadway film and television actress, and then I transitioned into producing and writing. So now I do documentaries and I write, and that's how I got where I am right now. I'm just gonna open it here. As you know, it's called Inappropriate Laughter, a story about loss, grief, and guilt, which anyone who's ever lost a parent and has to go through this, I know the guilt is actually one of the hardest parts of it for me anyway. I barely remember packing. One moment I was getting my kids to school. The next I was in my eldest sister's house, climbing the stairs, thinking I was prepared to see my mother for the last time. She was 96, not exactly a tragic age to die. I learned quickly that I was not prepared at all. I walked through the bedroom door and saw her surrounded by my family. She was frail, but somehow the same, lying in her bed, more coherent than I expected. "Taryn, my baby, I love you," she said. To which my eldest sister, Maureen, replied with a comical smirk, "She gets I love you, and I get the sponge baths and mouth cleansing." Maureen had taken care of my mother for 15 years. She ran a tight ship, kept mom healthy, well-fed, and supported by people who loved her. Maureen was on deck to be our matriarch, and there was nobody more equipped to take on that challenge. Over the years, several family members would find the need to live in her house, a pit stop on their journey to the other side of a temporary setback. Her door would always be open. It was an unspoken offer. Kindness is often practical and shrouded in exhaustion. I tossed my bag on the chair and I grabbed the cup of water in Maureen's hand. "Sorry, I'm so thirsty," I said, taking a big gulp. "Why is this minty?" "Deadpan," Maureen replied. "That's the cup I used to rinse mom's mouth swab." Makes sense. I slipped out of my winter coat and boots and climbed into bed with my mother. I could hear the crisp, fresh sheets crinkle around us as she gripped my arm like a vice, stronger than I had imagined she would be on her deathbed, locking me in with her. I thought, damn, I should have peed first. From there, I watched my 4 older sisters and my niece, Amy, a nurse practitioner, who had all been taking care of Mom, scurry about. Amy kept us on track with Mom's medical needs. She is one of the most compassionate people I know, and her insight was invaluable. I made it in time. I was relieved. I would get to say goodbye. That was part of the first chapter, and I'll never forget the look on the faces of my family when they saw me get into my mom's bed with her, because it was just an instinctual thing to do. And we barely fit. It was a hospital bed. And being in that bed with her brought on all of these feelings that I didn't expect. It was almost overwhelming. So the next excerpt will explain that. As I snuggled next to Mom, all other conversations drifted to the background. Her hand found its way into mine, and it felt so familiar, so comforting. I closed my eyes, and I tried to memorize that feeling. I began purposely recalling childhood moments with her, recreating them as vividly as possible in my mind, hoping to permanently imprint them for easy access. I remembered riding around in an old white Lincoln, the family affectionately referred to as Irving, appropriately named after the main character in a song entitled "The 142nd Fastest Gun in the West." Poor Irving was challenged to a gunfight during which he accidentally shot himself several times. He later died from his injuries. The similarities between Irving, the gunfighter, and Irving, the car, were uncanny. I'll never forget the smell of that car as well. My dad was a Ford salesman and drove a shiny new automobile with dealer's plates, which he tried to only use for work. Irving was my mother's car, a vehicle that was more than a little finicky and extremely unreliable. Family outings were approached tentatively. My dad would slip the key into the ignition, turning it oh so hopefully. But often it would whine like a teenager, then fall silent. That old car sat in the parking lot of our apartment building for a couple of weeks without use, until one morning my father left for work. He quickly returned, looking confused. He announced the car was gone. We stared at him for a few moments, unsure of how to respond. How could a car that never worked suddenly disappear? After the shock wore off, he reported it stolen. A few days later, the police called to tell us it had been found. Irving had been taken for a joyride, and they wanted to know if we would like to press charges. Press charges, he said. Hell no, I just want them to tell us how they got it started. For some reason, we still loved Irving, even though it disappointed us so consistently. In retrospect, this provides a certain insight as to the way our family worked. Rather than take a proactive self-help approach and fix what might be broken, personal flaws were viewed as charming personality quirks and left untouched. We found satisfaction in getting to the finish line dazed and limping, perhaps with only one shoe. We rarely won, but we finished, and it didn't matter anyway. Later, when we shared the story, we would revise its message to reveal unprecedented, humorous, and somehow beneficial end. In our minds, defeats were temporary. This philosophy has served us well over the years, but at that time, much like Irving, we were slow to start and barely getting by. That explains, every family is different. I'm telling all of the people who know for sure. Every family is different in how they process this. And, I felt today it was important for you to understand who my family was in order to understand why I wrote the book. When you grow up in food insecurity and homelessness on occasion, you tend to gather together like soldiers in a trench. You get very close, but that also means there's a lot of ups and downs and craziness. And sometimes somebody's mad at someone, it's 7 people, like nobody's ever going to get along all at the same time. And I was so honored and impressed by how my family rallied during this time, and any issues that anybody had with each other just went out the window. They stuck a pin in it. And I know that all of you probably don't always have that situation. And that was one of the biggest lessons I learned. One more. When I rushed to my mother's bedside that day, I worried that I may be too late. In truth, I would have plenty of time. We all sat down in her room together, including Mom in our conversations, despite her limited responses. On occasion, she would smile or let out a quiet laugh, which made us feel connected. We shared memories, looked through photo albums, and tried to string together a lifetime. Remember that, Mom, we'd say, each sharing our childhood recollections, which spread out over nearly 7 decades. Woven in between the stories of what could only be referred to as traumatic, we found glimmering threads of hope, humor, and at times, comforting revision. And then, here is one of the most profound turns in my experience that one day, because it was a little bit overwhelming. When I got there, everybody had their purpose, and I didn't know where I fit in. And I instinctually went to comfort Mom and honestly myself, because it was a way of having that one last Mom's hand in mine moment, and like taking in the smells and the thoughts that I was reimagining in my head to try and make those memories stay forever. And I started looking through her room. While sifting through the stacks, I came across a black binder. I assumed it was filled with her fictional work, perhaps a little girl on a farm, a bunny with a sassy attitude, or maybe her poetry. Then I began reading. In my mind, I heard her voice. When I was young, things were very different. Sometimes I wish for the old days, but when I stop and think about what I wouldn't have, not the things, but my children, my husband, my newly discovered talents, then I consider myself lucky. I found out I can draw and paint well enough for it to be a pleasure to do so. That line in her journal changed how I looked at almost everything in my life, because she wasn't doing it as an accomplishment. It was a pleasure to do so. That blew my mind. She had never said that to me in person. So I felt like by reading this journal, I was saying goodbye and saying hello all at the same time. I miss some of the people who made my younger days happy, but God has put a lot of other people in my life that make me happy now. I guess we must appreciate the people in our past who made us who we are and encourage us to do our best, and appreciate the people in our lives today who look to us for encouragement. I hoped I helped them. Dorothy Virginia Grimes. It was a binder filled in no particular order with her musings and memories of her life. I hugged the book. Through these pages, my mother could still speak to me. I stood in the middle of Mom's bedroom, arms wrapped around the journal, taking everything in as people navigated around me. Each sibling had their task, but I was still unsure of where I might fit in. My niece Amy got my attention. She stood at the bureau reviewing a log sheet she had created and placed on a clipboard next to all of Mom's medication: morphine, Ativan, syringes, and only if necessary, Haldol. Every 4 hours at first, she said to me, I would be the night shift. I would medicate my mother, dispensing the Ativan and morphine as instructed, just enough to alleviate her anxiety and her pain until her time came. I had my assignment and I knew what it meant. I would stay by her side, sleeping in a chair by the window, awakened by an hourly alarm, but I would not actually sleep. I would keep some part of myself conscious, aware of her movements, her voice, her breath, in case we could have one more moment of connection. I gripped the book tightly. This would be the thing that kept me sane while I watched over her in the dark, in between doses. I took the clipboard and pen and listened intently to my niece's instructions. We all had our personalities and our purpose. which we would discover to be very useful as we said goodbye to Dorothy Virginia Grimes, a gentle soul who raised 7 children under adventurous circumstances, as they say in the theater, places. When I came in that day, I really didn't know what I was going to be faced with. I knew my mom was 96, and because of Amy's incredible care, she made it to 96. Amy and Maureen and Maureen's husband, Craig, kept her going and happy and engaged for a very long time. But I knew this the second that Amy said, it's time. She's so compassionate, much like all of you, and was there for us in helping alleviate that guilt. We were doing what was best, for my mom, but it was still very difficult to process that. And I'm sure all of you must have that experience with every family you deal with, because who wants to say goodbye to their parent or to their loved one? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to say, yeah, I think it's time to give her the Haldol. And, it's a traumatic moment. And that's why it became eventually, as soon as the hospice caregivers came in, it changed our world. It was like the heavens opened up, and we were being thrown a life raft, and given the ability through the care workers to not get angry at each other, to maintain our family integrity, and have people who were so compassionate guide us as we mourned. When I did get there, I thought it was going to be a different experience. I come from a theater background. I get the drama. I wanted that cinematic moment where she was, reaching out to me, and we had this joy, and it was just so pretty. They always make death so pretty in the movies. And she was mumbling something. And all of a sudden I heard her say, well, I don't want to go yet, like a petulant child. And I was like, oh, I wonder who she's talking to. And she's having trouble letting go, because I'm going for the cinematic beauty of the situation. And so I decided to read her some of her journal. And I said, Mom, you wrote this in your journal. I miss Joe terribly. That's my father. No one could cheer me up like he could just by being by my side. He had passed quite a few years before her. I said, Mom, do you see him? You wrote that. It's okay if you want to go see Dad again. He loves you. It's okay if you want to go with him, I said, my eyes filling with tears. You see it in all the movies. A grieving family member softly permits his or her loved one to go toward the light. The music builds, the lights soften, the soul rises. Roll credits. Instead, she opened one eye. I remember thinking, it's like Orca, the movie, she opened one eye, it scared the heck out of me. Instead, she opened one eye and glared at me like I was an asshole. Tough room. I pulled back, feeling put in my place. She was not ready, and who the hell was I to suggest any differently? It honestly felt like she was saying, nobody asked you. Her organs were shutting down, but she refused to go. Her passing was inevitable, logical, and would prevent her suffering. I knew that, but her defiance in the face of death made me wish for a miracle, a way for her to feel better, to sit up and look out that window one more time, to appreciate the view of nature she so dearly loved. Instead, the timer went off, and I did what I had agreed to do. I carefully measured the medication and sat next to her on the bed. Her eyes opened, and we held a soulful gaze. She smiled and gently touched my hand. I was forgiven. I slid the dropper inside her cheek and squeezed the liquid free, bringing her one step closer to comfort. As she drifted off, I slipped back into her chair and watched the sky darken, knowing this was another step in the unpredictably profound journey of helping my mother die with dignity. And that was pretty much the changing moment for me. And over the next while, I was almost in a daze, and I'm sure you all get this, that people don't remember to eat. And, you know, my sister Maureen was like, Taryn, please go take a shower. Like, come on. And it was very, you know, it's a very humbling experience. And we were all going through one kind or another of that process. We're all kind of living in our own world, yet all in the same bubble. Jessica, did you have any questions or before I continue?
I did actually. Just speaking of, I'm looking at my notes from when I read your book, and I think on page 77, you spoke about your sister, Kate, and she had such faith, and how you both cope differently, and how she said, I think mom's going to rally. And she kept this positive attitude, yet your job was to give her the morphine and do this, and how you recognized your sister was coping differently than you, but also you wanted to honor your mother by keeping her comfortable, and how you felt a little reluctance. And I just thought that that was a very profound thing to write, because it's something that we do see often. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yes, you know, that I'll never forget that moment. My sister Kate has a gift of working, you know, with the elderly. She's, all her friends are like over 90. She's just that kind of person. And she sees what many don't see when they look at an elderly person. She's an artist, and she used to take original paintings into geriatric facilities so that they would again see real artwork, because they couldn't leave. And it broke her heart that when she realized that they would never again see an original painting. And so she has this uncanny ability to look behind the wrinkles in the wheelchair and whatever, and see the person that's in there so clearly. And I've always respected all of my family members, because everybody has one of those gifts that we know is their compassion and empathy zone. And you know, Kate, while we were running around, you know, I was running around, so like trying to make sure the medication was okay and all that, Kate was heating up towels in the dryer and putting them on mom's feet. And it was so enlightening, because all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm focused on her saying goodbye, and Kate's focused on her being here with us. And that's how she coped with saying goodbye. And it was just so fascinating to me. I think partially as an actress, like I go for that character build, and how she got there, and how we're also different in how we handle everything. And it reminded me that we all needed to be respectful, because the one thing I didn't want was, when it was all over, for anybody to say, I didn't get to put towels on her feet, or I didn't get to do what I knew I had to do in order to not look back with regret. And that was a profound moment for me. Thank you for bringing that up, because it really was. Are there any other moments, or?
There's a couple. I mean, I'll go over one more or two more, and then you can continue, and I'm
Okay.
sure we'll reach them. But thank you for that response. A lot of this, because this is what we do, it's so good to hear. We're the professionals in the setting, so it's wonderful to hear this honest point of view from a family member. But one of the things that I really did love too was when you wrote, it's on page, I think 68, when you said, each passage I read revealed a young woman I knew nothing about. We had missed an opportunity to learn anything more about mom's adventures firsthand, thinking we had already heard it. We had not, like most children, overlooked the lifetime of experiences that took place for Dorothy Virginia Grimes to become our mother. And I just thought, that's just wonderfully written, but also how true when we come to these times of peril, end of life, where we actually start to think of who else were they besides just mom. And you had a really great opportunity to find her journal. And And I just thought, I wanted to ask how, I know that's what the book was about, but how was that to find that and read that? That was such a special thing.
It was very special. And, you know, my mom over the years had written a lot of things in these little notebooks, but she also, I mean, my sister Maureen was like, let's just be honest. If mom had been left to her on her own, she would have been a hoarder. She keeps everything, newspaper clippings, and they're all relevant. She was an artist and she saw their relevance and she saw, you know, and so over the years, she would give us envelopes, and most of it was usually filled with like newspaper clippings about a horsey, you know, and you know, how to make dandelion wine, which was cool. And so she'd pass those out, and you know, after the third or fourth envelope, you just kind of stack them up, you know. And I didn't realize that she had stuck some journals in there. And that goes back to like, we all had a very close relationship, but it became harder and harder to communicate so that she could hear us properly and things like that. And I had read, you know, some of the things she wrote, which is usually about the farm, which as I mentioned in the book, my mother, you know, all she would talk about was how she grew up on that farm and she had a goat, and that was the best time of her life. And all seven of us were like, I don't even make like top 10. Like that's, you know, before we ever existed. But so some of those stories is what they were what I really expected. And we all had, you know, read those before. But when I picked up this particular one, it was from the perspective of the woman. It wasn't a story she was relaying. It was from the perspective of a woman I never really got to meet, because she set aside so much for us. She made so many sacrifices for us. And it was honestly profound. And it also changed the way I parent my children, well, who are grown now. Now I'm like, hey, you know what I used to do? Your father and I met at the bitter end in New York City. Hello, you know, because I want them to know that, because who I am is, you know, is everything to how I want to be viewed when they can no longer see that. You understand? Yeah. Yeah, thank you for bringing that one up. Let's see, what else did I have here? Yeah, I'll never forget that particular excerpt and experience. Okay. So this was when the hospice workers came, the caregivers came. And I was exhausted by that point. I think all of us were, but I was like somewhat delirious because I couldn't get myself to sleep during the day. And I was on the night shift, you know? And so I was in that toddler tired kind of experience where I was just totally exhausted. Anyway, I made my way into the living room where my family was discussing the plan for the day. We would be visited by the hospice nurses who would do their best to guide us through the painful process of watching our mother die. I never thought I would need training for that. I didn't know what to expect. Was it like boot camp for death? Would there be a big reveal where they would tell us what really happens? You can tell my drama, my leaning toward the drama. I was like, everything's a script. A drum roll, perhaps. Did I need supplies, a notebook, calculator? I giggled to myself at the thought. My sisters stared at me blankly for a moment, then continued their conversation, unaffected by my strange behavior. I was rarely understood anyway, and it seemed par for the course. We sat in a circle of chairs in Mom's room. They spoke in a comforting tone, presenting the disturbing details of what happens as one passes away. They prepared us for some difficult moments, specifically as Mom's body continued to shut down. Her arms and legs would become cold, with her heart pumping blood to only the most vital organs. The body is a masterpiece. They told us she may sleep much of the time, and lose her sight. She may want no clothing at all. She may have hallucinations. If she gets to that point, give her the Haldol. Finally, her breathing would become irregular, ending in a fish out of water pattern. I thought of her gasping for air. It was terrifying. I wondered briefly if this is what they feel comfortable sharing with us. From what details are we being shielded? I watched each of my sisters listen intently, trying to process the information in a practical way. The question began, is she in pain? Do we really need the morphine? What if she wants to say something? Are we preventing her from sharing her last words? I heard them speaking, but I couldn't concentrate. The sleep deprivation was kicking in, and I had become obsessed with one very distracting observation. One of our hospice nurses looked exactly like actress and comedian extraordinaire Amy Schumer. I mean, doppelganger. I could not stop staring. Seriously, I kept expecting her to drop the F-bomb or talk about vaginas. It was a staggering resemblance. Her voice, her hand gestures, it was uncanny. Could it be? Were we being punked? I couldn't shake it, so I decided the only thing to do was accept that Amy Schumer was Mom's hospice nurse. I composed myself and raised my hand like an insecure 8th grader. I give her the medication at night, I blurted out awkwardly. Shit, I embarrassed myself in front of Amy Schumer. She looked at me with the most compassionate expression I have ever seen. She knew what I was thinking. She knew what I was thinking. She looked at me and said, the Ativan stops her from having anxiety. The morphine controls the pain. Your mom was experiencing panic attacks, is that right? My sister Sheila knew this firsthand, having witnessed a few at the hospital. Yes, she said. She kept saying she was scared. What you're doing is best for her, the nurse assured me. For some reason, that reminded me of the notes from Mom that Mom used to write for us when we stayed home from school. Taryn isn't feeling well today, and I thought it best she stay with me. We were doing what was best, but it felt awful. The nurse's words were both comforting and humbling. Basically, the message was that death sucks and there's nothing we can do about it. So get your shit together and do your best. I missed my family, my husband, my kids, my cats, but I had to toughen up. It was enough to know Sean was with our children and that he would be there whenever I called. It kept my heart from breaking. That's marriage. Sometimes you don't have to be in the same room with a person to be overwhelmed by love and appreciation for one another. So that, all of it, that was my turning point moment with the hospice caregivers, the hospice nurses, that we were so not alone. And that lifted, I think for all of us that afternoon, it just lifted the weight right off our shoulders in many ways. We were still processing it, and we were still already grieving because my father had passed, and that was it. There's only one left from that generation. And it was a profound understanding that, as my father would say, we're just passing through. We're just passing through. We don't know what happens on either side of anything. So enjoy your relationships, don't hold grudges, be respectful of somebody else's journey, and embrace the happy, embrace the laughter. And that was really profound for me because shortly after, and I won't read it directly from the book, but, because I want to leave something for the reader. My mom had a real dip in a tragic moment that I don't think any of us will forget. And the guilt that we had, that she had she had a hallucination, and the guilt that she had was so powerful. And we had a conversation after that. We're all shaken, we're like, and Sheila, my sister Sheila, just goes, that's it. When this happens, just give me all the pills. Just give me all the pills. Everybody knows that now. And I get to this point, give me all the pills. And I'm like, I will take them now. Like right now, I'm like, I just want to chill. I really just want to chill out. This is painful. And then I realized I'm youngest of 7. And it became incredibly powerful to fully realize that it is possible that I will have to say goodbye to all of them in the very same profound and morbid and beautiful way. And it's a life lesson we're never taught, which is in part why I wrote the book, because the life lesson we're never, ever taught. Nobody ever tells you, you know, sometimes when your pets die, you get a little bit of that, which is good. But a lot of parents just say, yeah, they went to a farm, you know, it's like, you know, Roscoe went to a farm and he's fine now. But and that's why I did want to share in the book. And just so I don't end my readings with a completely downer. Let's see. I have to find this. We had a few deaths, and we had a very tragic time after my mother passed, because we lost my personal family, Sean and I and my children lost 4 more people within that 8 weeks, and that were very close to me. And let's see. It was just a completely and utterly like, it was like getting hit by a truck, standing up, turning around, having a train come at you, getting up, dusting yourself off, tripping over a rock. And it was just like nonstop, to the point where, and this is my point, where after all these deaths, Maureen called me and said, Taryn, the funeral home called, they're giving us a discount. And so I went around calling everybody in my family in my best Irish accent. And I said, darlings, if you're gonna go, go now, because we're getting a discount. And that is what made me, that's basically why I named the book Inappropriate Laughter, because that was it's horrible taste. It's like in horrible taste, but it made me smile, and it made them smile. And I know for a fact it would have made my mother smile, everybody I know who passed that in that 2 months smile. And that's what, you know, the profoundness of all of it. And with the caregivers that came in, that was our first meeting, and I shared a lot more of that in the book. But with the caregivers coming in, every time they came in, they shared just enough new information to give us comfort for what we're going through at that very moment. I'm like, is this place bugged? Because they're like spot on with the guilt, or what I'm feeling, or the delirium, or how guilty I feel about laughing all the time. You know, I mean, there was one moment in the book where, you know, Amy and I were trying to get my mom to the toilet chair, right? And my job was, Amy's a nurse, so she knew how to do it all. And I had my assignment. I was supposed to get in there, remove anything in the way, and then get out. And I got in there, and my arm got stuck. She sat down and began to pee on my arm. And I'm screaming at Amy, man down, save yourselves. And my mother, I swear to God, was laughing. And all I could think was, she was getting back at me for all the times that one of us would pee on her hand or her leg, or do something horrifying in the kitchen. And she just thought it was hilarious. And as did I. And, you know, those moments I would have felt guilty about enjoying, having a memory of that in her last days. And how weird is that? And the hospice nurses gave me permission to grieve and mourn the way it felt natural to do so. And they not once made anybody feel guilty, because some of us were in the room and some of us preferred to stay downstairs and do their thing and make sure everybody got food and make sure, all that stuff. And that was good. We were acting as a team, and everybody got to say goodbye the way they would want to say goodbye. And are there any more questions from you, Jessica, or anybody?
Does anyone else have any questions? You can type it into the chat or just speak. Thank you. Someone wrote, thank you so much for your utter brutal honesty. It is so true that no one speaks or prepares any of us for this inevitable phase in our lives. I'm so glad that the evolution of hospice has become a mainstay. They are the rocks allowing those of us to grieve, to be present, even if it's terribly scary and painful.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. It's having that professional, when you fix your car, you bring it to the guy who really knows how to fix a car. And it's a matter of safety and well-being. And I can't stress enough that if anybody goes through this, reach out to hospice care, because it doesn't seem like there are any limits to your understanding, compassion, and what you will help us arrange. Like we arranged for, they suggested, since mom, but I don't think you're really ever aware, as I said, of who your parents were. But one thing we did know is that my mother was Nikki the Smiling Cowgirl, a guitarist, singer, tap dancer, and rope twirler with the Lone Star Texans. And she used to tour, get this, the East Coast doing rodeos. I didn't even know they had rodeos in the East Coast. But once we shared, and that's another thing I would say, share everything about your loved one with the hospice workers, because you might not know, you might not think to do some of the things that they would know to do. They suggested that we bring in a music therapist. And I'll never forget it, that she came in and she was the most gentle person. And she just walked in and touched my mom's toe and said, "Hi, my friend." And we were like, huh. It was like watching Mr. Rogers, like it was just that, that feeling of just total centered, everything's going to be okay. And she said, what would you like to hear? And of course, we got amnesia immediately. We didn't know. And we grew up singing. We're all singers. And she said, I've got one that I think would be good. And she began to play the song, Ain't Got a Barrel of Money. We ain't got a barrel of money. Maybe we're ragged and funny, but we're traveling along, singing a song side by side. And that was my family's theme song. And it was just out of the blue. And at that moment, we were like, Dad's here. It was a sign for us. And she sang. And up until then, during that time, Mom really hadn't been interacting much with us. And when she went to leave, she said, "Have a good journey, my friend. I'll see you soon." And my mom shook her head and smiled. And that never would have happened had the hospice nurses not told us this might be really good for her. And so I know I'm fangirling all of you, but I sincerely feel that way. And everybody in our family felt the same way. They were just like, oh, thank God for you. So I'll answer any other questions and everything, but I do want to share some of my lessons learned, because it felt like the right thing to do. I didn't want to just write a book about my family. I wanted to write a book that was relatable to other families, and maybe share a few tips on what I what I learned through the process. So lesson number 1, honor every goodbye. I have changed my goodbyes, even the casual ones. For example, when my husband makes a run to the grocery store, I say, thanks, you're a good man. Or simply, I love you. That way, if I have a stroke and he comes home to find me face down, lying on the floor dead, my last words will not be, don't forget toilet paper. Take mental pictures. It's great to have photos to spark memories, but it's better to have mental pictures. That day when I climbed into my mother's bed and closed my eyes, I visually relived our life together. It was a gift. So I promised myself to step out from behind the phone camera once in a while and take more mental pictures to embrace that moment and file it in my mind. In my later years, when I'm far too fat or lazy to get out of the chair, which happened yesterday, I planned to flip through my album of memories, eyes closed, and remind myself that life is beautiful. Side note to my children, if I cannot remember anything when I am old, please feel free to show me the damn pictures. Keep a journal, which I think someone in the chats brought that up. So seems like we should all start a journal of our lives. So true. Our children have no idea who we were. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Keep a journal. Obviously, I'm a writer. One might assume I've kept a journal. Nope. For years, I would buy one and promise myself I would fill the pages with creative visualization or hilarious stories of my adventurous life. Instead, I would write for a few days and run out of things to say about myself. I mistakenly thought I was writing that journal for me. I already know me. I'm not that impressed. I could not think of a relevant word to put down on paper until I realized I was writing it for those I left behind. I began to realize that although I take my life story for granted, others may not. My mother's journal gave me a more personal look at who she was as a woman and a wife, not only as a mother. I want that for my children and all the loved ones I may leave behind. After all, once I am dead, revealing all the stupid, embarrassing things I did in my 20s and that one unfortunate first year of my 30s will not bother me at all. Embrace your place. I'm used to leading, but sometimes we all have to sit back and listen for our name. I was assigned to give the medication because the rest of my siblings were already exhausted from the past week of caregiving. And as the youngest sibling, I was most suited to stay up all night. We had our places, a way we could best contribute. In the theater, there's a useful term. It's called giving stage. It is a time to recognize that it is not your spotlight. It is a time to step back and let someone else direct and take your place in support of the bigger picture. It is a time to check your ego at the door and admit that we are not a diva headlining on Broadway. Be a team player and embrace your place. Let's see. Oh, I think this might be your favorite. I know it's mine. Number 7, hospice teams are a gift from God. On a serious note, even if he, she, they do not resemble comedians, I cannot stress enough the importance of having a hospice nurse available for your family. They're trained to intervene if there are any issues with your communication, or if you have, as a group, are having trouble making important decisions. They will help you avoid unnecessary conflict during a very stressful time. As a matter of fact, take advantage of any assistance you're offered. Call in some off-duty firemen if you want, or maybe a bagpipe player. Even if you do not need them, it's nice to have them around. So, and if you have any other questions, Jessica, I think we covered a lot, but.
We did. And I think that, thank you so much for your time. It was so wonderful. I strongly recommend, the book itself. You can get it on Amazon. I thought it was wonderful. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? Kathy did comment. Thank you for your insight. It's amazing how we are all so different, but shares the same similarities at the end of life.
That is true. That is the humbling moment, that no matter what the importance that we perceive to have in this life, because it's all an illusion. we all end up in the same place. And no life is more important. Nobody's life is more important than anybody else's. And when you get to this point, I think for me, and this happened with my dad too. I remember he was in his hospital bed and I said, you know, Dad, you must be so proud. I mean, your life was challenging. He was on the front lines for 4 years. And you know, you and Mom raised 7 children and they all like each other, you know, most of the time. I said, you just must be so proud of what you've contributed to the world, you know. And he, without even opening his eyes, my father, even when he wasn't in the hospital, used to like lie like this and like listen to the radio and listen to, you know, and without even opening his eyes, he said in his Boston accent, I am what the good Lord made me, sweetheart. And that moment made me just realize, you know, it was a trickle down because of the things my father did, even the small ones, just not letting us get caught up in the poverty and fighting. He fought hard to get out of the poverty, and that impact changed all of our futures, all of us. And my mother, just the nurturing and the strength she had when, you know, there was no food and she was like splitting an egg 7 ways, you know, and telling us we were broke but not poor. Those contributions are so much more important than anything else to me. And oh, so we have another one. Thanks for reminding me, writing down events of my life are not for me, rather my daughters and my grandchildren. You know, that was a big one for me because it felt so narcissistic. Today I went to Zabar's, you know, like, who cares? You know, it's like when we take pictures of our food. I always feel a little honky when I, you know, it's like, who cares what I eat? But when you're doing it to share it with people who love you, because I think the biggest gift that we can give to our loved ones is remembrance and understanding. And, you know, I whispered to Mom and my dad before they passed that my children and my children's children will know them. And that, I think, for me, was the most profound lesson in having this experience and writing this book. And just to be clear, you know, what I went through, we all went through something. Everyone in my family contributed in such a profound way. And I have to say, most, like Amy and Maureen were, you know, I mean, Maureen took care of her for so long, and Amy was like, she was in there. She had us all, you know, run a tight ship. And, you know, everybody has this book in them, you know, of their kind. And it's an important way to process, and sharing that story can really be helpful to others. So please, I highly suggest everybody, even if you just keep it in an envelope for your daughter to find, that's enough.
Thank you so much. This was really, we feel very honored to have had you speak and present. And I loved your book. I thought it was so well written and just so poignant in some parts where, you know, we're usually the people doing the care. So it's nice to see that the family's really in-depth perception of everything. So I really appreciated that. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? I don't think so. Well, we're so honored, and thank you. And hopefully we can coordinate again. This was really fun.
I would love to do it again. It's very fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time.
Oh, Jessica, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for what you do. I'm sincere in my appreciation, and I know that everyone in our family feels the same, and I'm going to make sure as many people know about it as possible. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.